As I said in an earlier chapter, great nature and wildlife video all have one thing in common: movement. There is very little demand for stationary footage of wildlife. Video is all about motion, and that is what viewers are looking for. Therefore, it is imperative that you have a tripod that will allow you to smoothly follow the unpredictable movement of whatever animals you find yourself filming. For example, if I'm shooting a bull elk crossing a river, I want to zoom in as close as possible and follow the action as he moves through the water. A lockdown shot that didn't pan with the animal's movement would be far less interesting. And tracking an osprey as it flies through the sky is going to be more impressive than the same bird just sitting on the limb of a tree. No matter how experienced you are as a wildlife still photographer, the first time you go out to film wildlife video with a powerful telephoto lens, you'll discover that it is a constant battle against wind, vibration, and your own shooting skills to keep shots smooth and steady. This is one of the biggest differences between still photography and video. Unwanted movement, shakiness, jerky pans, sluggish pans and tilts will always detract from your footage, and it's usually not something that can be fixed in post. Of course, the best way to help ensure steady footage is by using an excellent tripod that has been designed with the needs of wildlife cinematography in mind. And just to clarify, when I say tripod, I'm really talking about the entire tripod system, which includes the legs, or sticks as some people call them, the head, the spreader, the feet, the pan handle, and a carrying handle. You can purchase these components separately, but usually they are sold as a package. So when I say tripod, I will almost always mean the entire system. And just to be clear on the jargon, side-to-side horizontal motion is called panning, and up and down vertical motion is called tilting. With a good head, you should be able to do both types of movement simultaneously. Cameras come and go, lenses come and go, but a good tripod will serve you for decades, and I do mean decades. I bought my oldest tripod, an O'Connor 1030D, clear back in the 1990s, and after literally thousands of shoots around the world in all kinds of conditions, and despite its many cosmetic flaws, it still works just as well today as it did when it was brand new. Now, so you need to get in the mindset that tripods are investments you make for the long run. When you amortize their cost over a period of 10 years or more, the price isn't nearly as bad as it seems at first. And I can never understand why some people spend a lot of money on a great camera and then they buy the cheapest tripod they can find. Dumb. Now, you might be able to get away with a cheap tripod for some types of shooting where the tripod just needs to hold the camera steady on a static shot. But for wildlife, where we need to be able to follow action smoothly at a moment's notice and without any rehearsals or do-overs, a good tripod will absolutely make the difference between your success or failure. If your current tripod was purchased with the needs of still photography in mind, especially if it has a gimbal head, a three-way pan tilt head, or a ball head, then it definitely isn't appropriate for video. And if you're thinking a monopod will suffice, I'm sorry to tell you that isn't going to work for shooting wildlife video. Only a real tripod is going to provide smooth pans and tilts, ensure level horizons, and allow you to take your hands off the camera to manually make necessary adjustments to focus, exposure, and other settings. Also, if you're accustomed to shooting wildlife photos from your car window, well, you can say goodbye to that technique as well. For video, you're going to have to open the door, get out, and cross your fingers that you don't frighten away the animal before you can roll off a 15-second clip. And that is just another example of how shooting wildlife video can be more challenging than shooting wildlife photos. Now, sometimes when I'm out filming wildlife, people will come up to me and ask what I'm shooting and what kind of camera I'm using. Inevitably, they'll want to know how much my camera costs, and when I tell them, they're never very surprised because people expect professional cameras to be pricey. But then I like to ask them to guess how much they think my tripod costs, and that is what usually shocks them. For example, the 25-year-old O'Connor 1030D that I mentioned earlier and that I use with my big heavy Sony Z750 and F55 cameras cost me about $8,500 20 years ago. I also own a 5-year-old O'Connor 1040 tripod system that would cost nearly $12,000 to replace today. But don't worry, you can relax. I'm not going to suggest you spend anywhere near that kind of money for a tripod. I really wanted to give you an idea of how much a truly high-end professional tripod for big heavy cameras can cost. That way, when I tell you how little you're going to have to spend for a tripod that will suit your needs for filming wildlife with a small, lightweight, mirrorless, or cinema camera, you'll agree it is quite a bargain. We'll talk about my recommended tripods in a few minutes. Now, I own quite a few tripods because I frequently do multi-camera shoots, and every one of my cameras needs to have an excellent support system underneath it, especially when I'm hired to shoot rocket launches at Cape Canaveral with up to 8 cameras. Without a great tripod for each of my cameras that can stand up to gusty winds and the powerful sonic vibrations of rocket engines, I'd never get the steady footage I need for my clients and for selling the stock footage. Owning several tripods of various sizes and prices puts me in a good position to evaluate the relative pros and cons of each one. And I can tell you that even though I own some very expensive tripods, they aren't the ones I use with my FX6 and A1. Why? Because they're overkill for my small cameras, and their extra weight and size would just slow me down when I'm out trudging through the wilderness. Now for me, there are 6 things that I expect from a tripod. It must be fast to set up so I can be ready to shoot in a matter of seconds. It must be built to comfortably handle the entire weight of my entire camera rig, including the camera body, telephoto lens, viewfinder, battery, microphone, and any other accessories I might decide to use. It must be capable of providing very smooth panning and tilting. When I take my hands off the camera, the tripod must stay exactly where I aimed it with no sagging or drifting. It must be rigid, without any flexing or twisting when I'm following a moving animal. And it must be light enough that I don't mind carrying it long distances. However, simply buying a good tripod isn't enough. You must also know how to get it set up and configured properly for your camera rig, and of course, how to operate it smoothly while you're shooting. Now, those topics are going to be the main focus of this chapter. But first, at the risk of this becoming a buyer's guide, let's talk about some tripods I can recommend from personal, hands-on experience. These are the 4 tripods that I'm going to use as examples of this chapter. I own 3 of them, and I can wholeheartedly recommend any of these 4 for filming wildlife with small and medium-sized cameras. First, we've got a Sachtler Active 8 head with Sachtler Flowtech 75 carbon fiber legs. I own this tripod, and I use it almost exclusively with my FX6. Second, we've got the very similar Sachtler Active 6 head with the same Sachtler Flowtech 75 carbon fiber legs. I also own this tripod and mostly use it with my A1. Both of the active tripod systems feature the same basic design and functionality. It is mostly the payload capacity that is different between them. The Active 8 is rated up to 26 pounds, while the Active 6 is rated for only 17 pounds. Third, we have the more affordable Sachtler A6L with aluminum legs. Now, I don't own this particular model, but I have used it before, and I can vouch it is more than good enough for filming wildlife. And fourth, if you're on a tight budget and looking for a very affordable entry-level tripod system that still offers good performance, there's the Sachtler Ace M with aluminum legs. I have this tripod, and I use it sometimes with my A1 when I want to be extra light and nimble. Both of the Ace tripods feature the same basic design and functionality. It is mostly the payload capacity that is different between them. The Ace XL is rated to almost 18 pounds, and the Ace M is rated for about half that. In case you're unfamiliar with the Sachtler and O'Connor brand names, let me tell you that they are by far the 2 most popular tripods in television and film production. I have no idea what their actual market share is, but it's got to be around 80% because that's almost all I ever see being used on the productions I work on, especially for sports, news, and documentaries. Now, I'm not saying there aren't some good tripods made by other companies that would be good enough for filming wildlife. Certainly there must be, but I can't vouch for them because I haven't used them. Personally, I won't go out on a limb and recommend any tripod unless I've had the chance to test drive it myself. As you can see from the chart, there is a substantial price difference from left to right. But what isn't so obvious are the reasons why some tripods are more costly than others. In other words, they're all made by Sachtler, so what makes one better or more desirable than its siblings? Well, I hope those reasons will become clear as we progress through the rest of this chapter. Payload capacity refers to the tripod's ability to carry a heavy load. This metric alone is not an indicator of quality or price, but you do need to make sure the tripod system you select is rated for the weight of the camera rig you'll put on it. And because you should have an eye towards your future needs, buying a tripod that just barely works with your camera today might not be the best investment in the long run. My fully rigged FX6 with an Anton Bauer V-mount battery, extra viewfinder, quick release base plate, and a 200 to 600 millimeter lens weighs in at 18 pounds. So out of the 4 tripods on our chart, only the Active 8 is rated to handle that camera package. If the FX6 was the only camera I owned, then choosing any of the other 3 tripods would be a big mistake. On the other hand, my A1 with the 200 to 600 weighs only 7 pounds, so it can be used with any of the 4 tripods on the chart. Another important consideration is the overall weight of the tripod system. If you're traveling on foot for any distance, you want to make sure your tripod is not any heavier than you're willing to carry. The tripods on my chart range from less than 10 pounds to 14, and even 14 pounds is pretty light compared to the other tripods I own. For example, my O'Connor 1040 tripod system weighs in at over 22 pounds, and that extra weight can quickly become a burden out in the field. Next, you want to choose a tripod that has sufficient stiffness so that it won't flex or bend when you pan or tilt the camera. A tripod that is too flimsy will also be susceptible to unwanted movement caused by wind or even your feet moving around on the ground next to the tripod while you're filming. The main determining factor for tripod stiffness is the legs, not just the material they're made of, but also their design, construction, and attachment points. Aluminum legs are good, but carbon fiber is even better. Carbon fiber is the lightest and strongest material for tripod legs and is almost always preferred by professionals in the television and film industries. To give you a better idea of why the carbon fiber Flowtech legs cost more, just look at how stable they are when I attempt to wiggle the legs. Very rigid with very little lateral movement. Now look what happens when I apply the same force to the Ace aluminum legs. That is a significant difference. For a light payload with slow movement, they'll still be okay, but the extra stiffness of the Flowtech legs is well worth their higher cost, in my opinion. Another advantage of carbon fiber is that it conducts heat and cold at a very slow rate. So if your shooting keeps you out in the sun all day or out in the freezing cold, carbon fiber legs will be much more comfortable to carry around. Both of the active tripods on the chart feature carbon fiber legs, while the Ace tripods I've selected are aluminum, thus accounting for a large portion of their difference in price. I should mention, however, that the Ace XL is available with carbon fiber legs for around $300 extra, but I also need to warn you that even though they are made from carbon fiber, they aren't the same design as the active tripods, which, as you'll see, are in a class all their own. An important consideration when choosing a tripod for filming wildlife ought to be how much time it's going to take you to deploy it. Time is of the essence for wildlife, and if your tripod can't be set up and ready to go in a matter of a few seconds, you're going to miss a lot of opportunities. The legs that come with the active heads are called Flowtech legs, and they're also available as a standalone product in case you decide to buy them separately and use them with some other head you already own from Sackler or another manufacturer. A Flowtech legs are unlike anything else you've ever seen before, but to understand what makes them unique, let's first look at the legs that come with the Ace heads, and almost all other types of tripods for that matter. Traditionally, most tripods have 2 or 3 leg sections called stages that extend out to raise the tripod to the desired height. A 3-stage tripod uses 2 locking knobs or levers to join 3 sections, which means there are 6 different knobs, 2 on each leg, which must be loosened and then retightened every time you set up the tripod, change the tripod height, or pack up to go home. That process can be very cumbersome and time-consuming when you're out filming wildlife where every second counts, and you don't want to be fumbling with a lot of knobs one at a time. I'm sure you've used tripods like this before, so I'll just leave it at that. Deploying the stages on a Flowtech tripod is very different. At the top of each leg, where they are very easy to reach, you'll see a red brake handle. When the handle on a leg is released, all 3 stages of that leg instantly become loose, and gravity will take over to extend the leg to the desired height. There are no other knobs or other controls that need to be dealt with, and that saves you from having to bend over and manually adjust multiple locks on each leg. Now, this innovation is very clever and provides a really fast way of deploying your tripod in a hurry. And this system really works great when you're shooting on slopes or other uneven surfaces. For low shots, where you want to get down to the same level as the wildlife you're shooting, there's a locking button on the top of each leg that allows you to spread the legs completely out to the sides, lock them in place, and thus put the head just barely above ground level. Packing up is easy too. You just fold the legs in a little bit, release the brakes, and let gravity take over. When the legs are folded, hidden magnets embedded near the tripod feet hold the legs together. I love the magnets. There is nothing worse than picking up a tripod to carry it and having the legs go sprawling around everywhere. The shape of the legs also provides a nice flat surface, and that makes it a lot more comfortable to carry the tripod and camera on your shoulder. And for times when you don't want to carry the tripod on your shoulder, the Flowtech tripods give you the option of mounting a nice rubberized handle to facilitate easy carrying. Both of the active tripod systems on the chart come with carbon fiber Flowtech legs, while the Ace tripods have aluminum legs with knobs. And that right there, in my opinion, more than justifies their difference in price. Another very important component of a professional tripod is the spreader. I would no sooner go out shooting with a tripod that didn't have a spreader than I would leave home without camera batteries or memory cards. Yes, a spreader is that important. A spreader's job has two parts. First, it ensures all three legs will always open up to the exact same distance from the center. That symmetry between the three legs helps add to the overall stability. And second, just like a girder in a building, the spreader adds a rigid point of contact between the three legs. There are two kinds of spreaders to choose from, mid-level and ground level. And this is a very easy decision to make. I can't tell you how much I dislike ground level spreaders. Even indoors on a level floor, they are always underfoot, getting in the way, and worst of all, a ground level spreader does nothing to help with stability. On the other hand, a mid-level spreader is great for use on uneven terrain such as grass, mud, rocky ground, and sloped surfaces. The mid-level spreader on Sackler tripods folds up neatly between the legs, allowing them to close as if the spreader wasn't even there. All four of the tripods on our chart come with mid-level spreaders. Finally, we come to the most important component of any tripod system that is used for video, and that is the head. If you expect to shoot smooth, professional-looking video without the dreaded herky-jerky home movie effect, you must be able to move the camera smoothly in any direction. And that means that you're going to need a fluid head. Once you've had the opportunity to shoot with a really nice fluid head tripod, you will immediately understand how much better suited they are for getting smooth, professional-looking camera movement. Fluid heads get their name because there is a viscous fluid inside the pan and tilt mechanisms to provide an adjustable amount of friction. This friction is what dampens the movement, reduces jerkiness, and allows very smooth starts and stops. On the other hand, many cheaper tripod heads will use a friction pad rather than oil to introduce resistance. So those tripods might seem okay at first, but as time goes on, those pads will wear out and you'll find yourself buying another head because the first one you wasted your money on isn't smooth anymore. Here's the test that I performed to see if a head is any good or not. First, I must be able to smoothly pan and tilt to any angle just by applying light pressure to the tripod handle. And when I take my finger off, the head must stay firmly in place. It cannot snap back or sag or drift even a fraction of an inch. If a head can't do that, then it's not good enough for professional video. Heads for still photography usually have a flat base, but heads that are designed for video have what is called a bowl or ball mount. Bowl mounts are typically available in two diameters, 75 millimeters or 100 millimeters. All the Sackler tripods on my chart have a 75 millimeter bowl, which not only keeps the costs lower, but also enables the use of smaller, lighter heads. There's no reason to carry a heavy 100 millimeter tripod out into the wilderness if a smaller, lighter version will get the job done just as well. Why is having a bowl mount so important? Well, for video, getting your camera completely level to the horizon is critically important because you're not going to be able to fix it in post. And bowl mounts make leveling the camera fast and easy. Now, instead of adjusting the height of each tripod leg one at a time to get the camera level, there is a single adjustment underneath the head. With one hand, you hold the camera steady. With the other hand, you loosen the tie-down knob under the head. While looking at the lighted bubble, you move the head around, and when the bubble is centered, you lock the knob down again. Not only does a bowl make leveling easier, but it's also a hell of a lot faster. And as I've said 100 times already, speed is of the utmost importance for wildlife. Now, if the idea of using a tripod that is equipped with a bowl sounds good to you, then you're really going to love the latest innovation from Sachtler, which makes leveling your camera faster than is possible with any other head. Similar to how the speed locks work on the Flowtech tripod legs, the Active 8 and Active 6 heads have a feature called Speed Level. No longer is it necessary to reach underneath the camera to loosen a knob. With Speed Level, use one hand to hold the camera, use your other hand to lift this lever, watch the bubble as you level the camera. When it's level, push the handle back down and you're done. Now that little change between reaching underneath to loosen the knob versus lifting the lever may not seem like a big difference to you, but believe me, it is a huge advancement in tripod design and usability. When you combine the speed locks on the legs and speed level on the head, setup time is cut to a fraction of what it would otherwise be with a traditional tripod. All the tripods on our chart have fluid heads with 75mm bowls, but only the two active heads have speed level and speed locks. All four of the tripods on the chart also come equipped with a quick release plate that lets you mount and detach the camera quickly and securely. Sachtler offers two types of mounting plates for their heads, so it's important for you to buy the head that has the type that you prefer. The two types are known as touch and go and side load. The advantage of the touch and go system is that once you have your camera and head all perfectly balanced, it is easy to put the camera back onto the tripod at the exact same position every time without even thinking about it. Here you can see the touch and go system on one of my older Sachtler heads. Notice that the camera will snap right into the same place every time. However, getting the camera perfectly balanced on a touch and go head can sometimes be difficult, if not impossible, because there's only 2.4 inches of travel from front to back. And as we'll see in a few minutes, getting the camera perfectly balanced is absolutely critical. When you loosen the knob over here, you can then slide the whole mounting plate forward or backwards to get the center of gravity directly over the middle of the head. Now, getting the balance just right is easy to accomplish when there's a small lens mounted on the camera, but when you're shooting with a long, heavy telephoto lens, oftentimes that 2.4 inches of travel won't provide enough range of motion to get the camera perfectly balanced. For that reason, I prefer to use heads that have the side load mechanism, which allows for up to 4.7 inches of travel on the active heads and 4.1 inches on the ace heads. Now, sometimes that extra couple of inches of travel can make all the difference between getting the camera properly balanced or not. Unfortunately, sometimes even having 4 inches of travel won't be enough to get perfect balance, and that is where the side load has another advantage up its sleeve. Take a look at the quick release plate for touch and go on the right and side load on the left. Notice that with touch and go, the position of the tie-down screws that go into the base of the camera are pretty much fixed. There is only a very tiny amount of possible adjustment. Now look at the side load plate and notice that the position of the screws on the plate itself offer an additional 3 to 4 inches of travel, which gives you a total range of adjustment of at least 7 inches versus only 2.5 inches on the touch and go. What that means is that side load heads are easier to use when you change from a big heavy lens to a shorter, lighter one and vice versa. All four of the Sachtler tripods on our chart offer the side load option, and that's what I recommend you choose. In a few minutes, when we walk through the steps of setting up a tripod for the first time, you'll see just how critical it is to maintain a perfectly balanced center of gravity. Speaking of balancing the camera, another critical component of a tripod head is the counterbalance mechanism that allows you to adjust the head so that it can carry heavier or lighter loads. It always surprises me just how many professional camera operators that I speak to who don't understand the importance of counterbalance, but it makes such a huge difference. Now, earlier I said that you should be able to tilt the camera with one finger and let it go and have the camera stay right where you left it without falling backwards or forwards. Now, this is not accomplished by cranking up the friction to hold the camera in place, and it's not accomplished by tightening the lock knob to hold the camera in place. What a properly set up counterbalance does is neutralize the weight of the camera. The idea is that you can tilt forward or backward and then let it go, and the fluid head should remain tilted without having to lock the tilt axis. If you dial in too much counterbalance, you'll end up fighting to keep the camera from springing back up. And if you don't dial in enough, then you'll end up fighting to keep the camera from drooping down. Some heads, such as my two O'Connor heads, have a continuously adjustable control, which is ideal for accurately dialing in the perfect balance, right down to the fraction of an ounce. That is one of the features you get when you spend more than $10,000 for a tripod. On other tripods, such as all 4 of the Sackler heads on our chart, Counterbalance is limited to a certain number of presets. You just turn the knob to get as close as you can to perfect balance. But because you're limited to the presets, sometimes you might be off just a little bit. And that's usually okay. As you'll see in a few minutes, it just needs to be close. It doesn't have to be perfect. The Active 8 has 15 counterbalance presets to choose from because this head can handle any camera rig from 0 pounds to 26. That is a pretty big range. The Active 6 also has 15 counterbalance presets to choose from, even though its capacity only goes from 0 to 17 pounds. The Ace XL can also handle any camera up to 17 pounds, but this lower priced head only has 8 presets to choose from. And finally, the Ace M only has 5 presets, but because its capacity tops out at less than 9 pounds, it simply doesn't need to have as many choices. Now in a few minutes, we'll walk through the steps of setting up the appropriate amount of counterbalance. Next, every professional head has 2 independent adjustments for pan and tilt friction, which is sometimes called drag. On all 4 of the Sackler heads, tilt friction is controlled with this dial, and pan friction is controlled with this dial. When drag is set to 0, it requires almost no pressure to move the camera. But when drag is set to a higher setting, more force is required. How much drag you want to use is a matter of personal taste, and you might even prefer using different settings in different shooting circumstances. Personally, I change my drag settings frequently. For example, if I'm shooting an interview, I like to have a lighter setting, but for sports and wildlife, I prefer more resistance. Now, one thing I've learned after teaching numerous camera operation workshops around the world is that most beginners tend to have their drag set way too loose. It seems a lot of people are under the false assumption that less friction equals smoother motion, but that is just the opposite of how it works. When the drag is too loose, the camera just wants to flop around all over the place at the slightest touch. I like to compare it to walking on ice. As I'm sure you know, it is very difficult to move around on ice with precision because there isn't enough friction to give you any traction. It's the same way with the tripod head. Friction, or drag, is what allows you to smoothly pan and tilt the camera with precision. On the Active 8 head, there are 7 settings to choose from, and I prefer to use number 7 for both pan and tilt. On the Active 6 head, there are 3 settings to choose from, and I prefer to use number 3 for both pan and tilt. On the 2 Ace heads, there are also 3 settings to choose from, and not surprisingly, I prefer to use number 3 for both pan and tilt. As I said, how much drag you wish to use is a matter of taste, but I recommend you start with a higher setting first and only change it to a looser setting if it doesn't feel right to you. But please, give the higher setting a chance. Trust me when I say that it is better to have too much friction than not enough. In addition to dials for controlling drag, a professional head will also have 2 separate levels for locking both pan and tilt. Those locks should never be used to add extra drag or to prevent the camera from drifting because it hasn't been set up and balanced properly. If you have to engage the locks every time you take your hands off the camera, you either have a crappy tripod or you haven't set it up properly. The only time I use these locks on my tripods is when I'm going to record a time lapse and I want to make sure the camera doesn't move even the slightest amount. Other than that, the lock should rarely be needed. Finally, we come to the all-important pan handle for the tripod head, which can be adjusted to whatever angle feels most comfortable to you. The purpose of the handle is simply to provide the necessary leverage to pan and tilt the camera smoothly. Trying to film wildlife action smoothly without a handle would be next to impossible. Now, when you buy a tripod head from any of the major brands, it will generally come equipped with a 16-inch pan handle. However, while that length used to be ideal for large television cameras where the viewfinder was mounted up front and on the left side of the camera body, 16 inches is actually too long to be comfortably used with today's smaller cameras, especially when the viewfinder is located at the rear. Not only does a long handle tend to jab you in the chest when you try to look through the viewfinder, it also puts your hand at an uncomfortable distance behind your shoulder. Now, because I couldn't find any shorter pan handles to buy a few years ago, I decided to make my own. I removed the rosette from one of my tripods and took it to the local hardware store, where I went from tool to tool until I found one that had the right diameter to replace the stock handle. Believe it or not, what I ended up choosing was a 6-in-1 nut driver made by a company called Irwin. When mounted on my tripod head, it's only 7 inches long and has a nice flat rubberized grip that feels great in the hand during all kinds of weather. Please note, however, that it does require the rosette from the original pan handle, so it's not a totally standalone solution. And not only does the shorter length make it easier to get my head close to the viewfinder on small cameras, surprisingly, I found it also makes panning and tilting smoother. And when it comes time to pack up the tripod, there's no need to fold the handle down. I just transport it with the handle in the position where I like to have it for operation. Now that we've familiarized ourselves with the various components of a tripod system, let's walk through the necessary steps to get a new tripod set up and balanced for the first time. The first thing you need to do is assemble your camera in whatever configuration you're going to use for shooting. For this demonstration, I'm going to keep things super simple and just use my Sony A1 with the 200 to 600mm lens. A big advantage with this combination is that the lens has a built-in collar, which allows the tripod to be mounted underneath the lens rather than underneath the camera body. Imagine how front-heavy this rig would be if you tried to mount the tripod beneath the camera. Even if I could manage to get it balanced, I doubt that it would be very stable. My favorite tripod to use with the A1 is my Active 6 with Vortex 75 legs. The weight of the camera and lens combined is only 7 pounds, which is well under the 17-pound weight limit of the Active 6. Plus, I get to take advantage of the Sackler speed locks and speed level. The first step is to attach a quick release plate to the lens collar. I recommend putting it right in the center and only moving it backwards or forwards if you later have trouble getting the center of gravity positioned directly over the center of the head. Next, dial down the counterbalance control to 0. Dial down the pan drag to 0. Dial down the tilt drag to 0. And then engage the tilt lever lock. You can also lock off the panning if you want to, but it really won't make any difference in the next steps. Now we need to level the head while using the bubble as our guide. You just lift up this lever, move the head around until the bubble indicates the head is level, and then press the lever back down. It is critical that the head be perfectly level before you proceed. Now it's time to mount the camera on the head. Notice how much range we have with the side load system to move the camera forward and back. The plate is equipped with stops at both ends, so it's impossible for the camera to accidentally slide too far and fall off. Position the quick release plate someplace near the middle, and then tighten the red locking knob to hold it in place. Now, while using one hand to steady the camera so that it can't suddenly dip forward or back, carefully release the tilt lock lever. At this point, the camera will be very unstable, so use caution. Notice how front heavy the camera is right now. If I take my hands off, it immediately dips forwards. So what we want to do now is loosen the red lever again, and then slide the camera backwards to find the center of gravity. This is a process of trial and error as you move the camera one way or the other. Check the balance, and then repeat as necessary until you find the sweet spot where the camera mostly wants to stay level. After you find that position, lock the red knob to hold the camera in place. Be careful though, because the camera can still dip forward or backward unexpectedly, so make sure to keep it supported with one of your hands. Now we need to adjust the counterbalance so that the camera will stay in position when you take your hands off of it. The head has 15 possible counterbalance settings. I'll turn the knob to 7, so begin with a mid-range setting. Whenever you change the counterbalance setting, you must remember to tilt the head all the way forward and all the way back to engage the new setting. Now aim the camera downward and carefully take your hands off of it. If it stays in position when released, then it's correctly balanced. But if it springs back up, as seen here, then the counterbalance is set too high. Let's dial the counterbalance to 6. Tilt the camera all the way forward and back again to engage the new setting. Aim the camera down again and take your hands off of it. As you can see, 6 is a little less bouncy, but still too much. I'll try 5. And that's getting pretty close now. I'll try 4 to see how it compares. And now we've gone too far. Instead of springing up, the camera droops down, which is equally bad. It seems the best setting is going to be 5. It's not perfect, but I know from experience that it's going to be close enough after we finish the rest of the setup. Now it's time to adjust the tilt drag to whatever feels best to you. As I said, I prefer a lot of friction, so I'll just go straight to number 3. And then I'll set the pan drag to the same number. You don't have to use the same setting for tilt and pan if you don't want to, but generally you'll want them to be equal. When you're following an animal and you're panning and tilting simultaneously, it is much better if both directions of movement require the same level of force. If one is stiffer or easier than the other, you'll have trouble executing smooth movements. Now watch how easy it is to pan the camera. That is perfection. There's no sudden jerk when the camera starts moving, and no sudden jerk or backlash when the camera comes to rest. If I take my hands away from the camera, it stays right where I left it with no sagging or herky-jerky motion. This right here is what having a great tripod is all about. As I mentioned earlier, the one thing that isn't ideal about using a side-load head is that because there is such a huge range of forward to back adjustment, it can be tricky to consistently remount the camera at the exact same position every time you put it back on the tripod. Believe me, you don't want to waste time rebalancing the camera over and over again while you're out on location. Now my workaround is very simple and low tech. I put small pieces of tape on the quick release plate and the tripod head, and then I draw a line with a Sharpie to mark exactly where they should line up. It's a simple, fast, and foolproof solution. The big advantage of choosing a very good tripod system and also taking the time to set it up properly before you head out the door to go shooting is that you'll be able to deploy it and start shooting much faster. If you've done everything right, you should be able to use a very light touch when following the subject. Be gentle, and don't forget to use the pan handle to get better leverage. It'll take some practice to get proficient, but you'll get there eventually. And we'll talk more about shooting techniques in Chapter 18. Now, something I really love about my Sackler tripods is that I don't have to worry about getting them dirty or wet. Now, I do try to keep the heads dry, but there's nothing wrong with setting up the sticks in a few feet of water if that's what it takes to get the shot I want. Although I do have to be a little careful in Florida where gators could be lurking in the muck. At the end of the day, I just hose the legs off and leave them extended overnight to dry out.